Is academic writing supposed to feel this lonely, or have we just accepted it as normal? What if the real barrier to your writing isn't motivation, but isolation? Hey co-authors, in this episode, we explore why so many scholars feel cut off when writing and how that loneliness undercuts our productivity, passion, and well-being. We uncover the forces that keep us isolated and share concrete strategies to build connections, boost mental health, and reignite your joy in academic writing. So let's dive in. Whenever I was a master's student, one of the things that I remember most is how intensely and almost heartbreakingly alone I felt all the time. I don't think a lot of people in the program knew that. I'm Facebook friends and I still keep up with my cohort. Now I'm a professor. I see the faculty from that program at conferences. I talk to them. We have a good time. I think a lot of them might actually be surprised to know how lonely I was during my time in my program. I think a lot of that was because I'd never lived outside of my home state of Oklahoma. My hometown of Oologah is like 800 people. And so, very small, very close-knit. So whenever I went to this university that had literally tens of thousands of people just in the university, I was completely overwhelmed. I think I also felt a lot of pressure because my undergraduate program was not very well known for sending folks to competitive programs. And so I really kind of felt this pressure to be excellent, to be sort of an ambassador for my program and to honor the professors who had helped me get to this point in my life. So I didn't have really a lot of friends. I didn't have any family out there. They were all back in Oklahoma. It's like a 17-hour drive. So I have no one around me. I feel this pressure to be excellent in my program. And I remember distinctly, it was in February. It snowed the night before. It was still snowing that morning whenever I was walking to classes, and it's early in the morning and I'm trudging through the snow. And I think to myself, I'm just going to keep walking. And then whenever I see the bus, I'll flag it down and I'll ride the rest of the way to my classes. And I think it was just a combination of the snow masking the sound and just me being in my own head. I completely missed the bus. The bus passes me by. I try to wave it down. It's too late. It just keeps going. And here I am. I'm still about a mile away from campus. It's cold. I'm a little hungry. I'm tired. And I'm done with it. I just think to myself, you know what? Screw this. I don't want to do this anymore. This is not worth it. And I almost just turned around and went back to my apartment and emailed my professors and was just like, I'm just not going to do this anymore. I didn't do that, mainly out of stubbornness and a little bit of pride. But I also knew that there were people who were expecting me to be there. People at that program, people from my previous program, my family, my friends from back home, and I didn't want to let them down. I tell that story because I think you might be in a similar place. Maybe you're the first person in your family to go to college, or maybe you're from a different country. Maybe you're like me, you were living 15 hours away from your family. Maybe you just haven't really made the connections around you yet. But whatever it is, whatever that's facing you, you might feel like you're in this lonely space. And that can be really hard because as a writer, oftentimes we struggle with these feelings of loneliness because writing is oftentimes such a solitary activity. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about breaking out of patterns of loneliness that are harming your mental health and ultimately your writing. And I think moving towards a more collaborative ethic is going to be more productive for you, not just for your academic publishing, but also just for your overall mental health and your stability in your program or your cohort or your university, wherever you are. So let's dive into that today. Are you interested in mastering scholarly writing, developing productivity, and increasing impact, all while staying healthy? Then welcome to the Publishing Academic Research Podcast. Hi, my name is Dr. Kyle Reddick, and I'm a full professor at the University of Northern Iowa. I've written dozens of articles, books, chapters, and essays, as well as edited some of the top journals in my discipline. I meet so many scholars who have creative, innovative, and daring ideas, but can never seem to get those projects from proposals to print. I want you to get your work in the hands of people who will read it and appreciate it. So let's get into this week's big idea. The first thing I'm going to say is that if you're having feelings of loneliness in academia, whether you're a professor, grad student, undergrad student, whatever, whoever you are, the first thing is that you are not alone in those feelings. There's a lot of research that's out there that shows that academia is actually a place that has very high rates of depression, anxiety, loneliness, all sorts of negative outcomes. Now, I do want to separate out a little bit the idea of loneliness from depression or anxiety, because depression and anxiety are mental health issues that have diagnoses, they have criteria that go along with them, and oftentimes require mental health interventions and therapy. So if you're having those types of feelings, then you need to start reaching out to your advisors, mental health professionals, other folk who can help you, because even though loneliness can lead to feelings of depression or anxiety, and even though loneliness sometimes is an outcome of depression or anxiety, they are not the same thing. So I want to be really clear here that we're focusing on loneliness in this episode. So, because loneliness is the result of what happens whenever you're cut off from other people by overcommitting to your work or just not making connections with other people in the place that you are. So I'm going to talk about 3 reasons why people have these feelings of loneliness, and then I'm going to connect those to our academic writing practices and show how they threaten our ability to find sort of satisfaction and joy that I think we deserve and that we should have through our writing. The first reason that a lot of people have these feelings of loneliness, and I've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but I'm going to say it again here, is that part of that is just it's the nature of academic work. I think that for a lot of people, they have this sort of idealized myth that academics are these lone, towering intellects. You see a little bit further than everyone else. You're a little smarter than the average bear. And so collaborating with others, it's a sign of weakness, or it doesn't even really occur to you because you have your research interests and there's absolutely no way that other people share your passions or your interests or share them to the level that you have. And so it's obviously just much better for you to always be in the driver's seat, always be in control. And so you just never make connections with other people. And as a result, you just end up cutting yourself off from everyone else. I think that's particularly true in more humanistic or creative forms of scholarship, because in those areas, it's oftentimes much more difficult to say who was the driving force or the intellectual force behind a particular project. Whereas more science forms, you might have this person's in charge of data collection, this person's in charge of data treatment, this person's going to do the lit review, and everything kind of has like a nice, neat container that one person can be assigned to. It's much harder to do that the more creative or humanistic your scholarship is. But whatever type of scholarship you do, I think that there is this idea that our work is a sort of single or solitary endeavor, and we sort of valorize this idea of the lone genius who is able to produce all of this scholarly work on their own and really kind of have their name be synonymous with this field of study. The second reason, which I think is more institutional or structural, is that I just don't think that academia itself is really set up well for collaborative work. Our tenure and promotion cases, our job hirings, all those sorts of things, we are looking for first author or solo authored work as sort of the gold standard of intellectual contribution. I think oftentimes if you see a person that has a whole bunch of collaborative projects, especially if that person's not in the first author position, then there's this sort of sneaking suspicion that you've just been riding on other people's coattails. And I will say that as someone who, I've done a lot of collaborative writing, I think that there are better ways of reading that situation. Like, to me, it's a red flag if I see someone have a lot of co-authored work where it's not just a matter of them not being first author, but also that the group of people that they're writing with often changes. And the reason for that second one is important is because that indicates to me that you are glomming on to a team of people. You're not fulfilling your end of the bargain of whatever that project is. And so as soon as that project's done, those people don't want to work with you again. So that's a red flag, right? But if I see a whole bunch of collaborative work with the same group of scholars over the course of years, oh, well, cool. Well, that probably indicates that you have a group of like-minded scholars that are really working towards something. And I think that's actually a strength. But even beyond that, I think that it's very rare to see people acknowledge that they've had equal contributions to projects. We don't see really anything at the university level about building community around things or building co-authorships that share credit equally. Because there's this suspicion about collaboration and about collaborative work in academia, it forces a lot of us to do more solitary work than we should be doing. If you think about how complicated a research project can be, developing longitudinal research, multi-site research, experimental research, deep ethnographic research, all of those different things, how much easier would it be and how much better would our insights be if we saw those as collaborative rather than as well, I have to do that by myself, which oftentimes means that type of work never gets done, and we compromise by having worse research designs and having to be way more cautious about what our research is telling us because we have to use these research designs that actually aren't as rigorous as they could or should be. This goes into the third reason that I think that loneliness is such a problem in academia, which is that I think that we are actually the ones that romanticize how bad our loneliness is and how unhappy and unfulfilled that we are as a measure of our worth and effort in our research projects. We regale each other with tales of how many monster drinks that we chugged as we had a 16-hour binge of writing, and how many days that we went without sleep to do this project or that project, or how many revisions that we had to do on some paper before it finally got published. Like, we try to take these very negative experiences and not just reframe them into positive ones, but really valorize them in a way that's incredibly destructive. And what's really bad, I think, is whenever faculty pass that ethic on to their students. So whenever a student complains about being lonely or overwhelmed or anxious or anything else, we immediately start to regale them with tales about how hard it was whenever we were in grad school, or how hard our job is now, and how we suffer for the love of our research. We suffer for the love of our job. So then we're not even just discounting the pain of the students and the people who are in front of us, but we continue to prop up this incredibly destructive idea that suffering is somehow not just normal, but a desirable part of our jobs. And that's, folks, that is just an utterly self-destructive approach, not just for writing, but your relationships with other people, your colleagues, your departments, your partners, your kids, whoever. The idea that you need to suffer in order for you to feel fulfilled, or to feel like you have to suffer in order for you to deserve your accomplishments, that's nonsense. You do not need to feel like that. It is absolutely and perfectly fine for you to acknowledge struggle, to appreciate going through that, and to acknowledge the lessons that you've learned through your struggle. But you should never self-flagellate and think that you don't deserve happiness or accomplishment without having some sort of pain associated with it. Okay, sorry. Felt like I got up on my soapbox there for a little bit. So at this point, we've talked about a few reasons about why loneliness occurs in academia. And I have to say that for myself, whenever I'm working with graduate students, in my capacity as a graduate program coordinator, it's those students who end up having the most struggles in their graduate coursework typically are those who have their entire identity anchored into this idea of being a good student. And maybe that's you, right? Like, you might be a student who feel all this pressure to be this awesome student because, well, you went to grad school. That's, sort of a rare occurrence in general, but maybe you're like the first in your family to go, or maybe you just feel a lot of pressure from your faculty. But even if you're a professor, especially if you're pre-tenure, you might be in this place where you're like singularly focused on getting your writing done, obtaining or securing a job. And so what I have found is that people who have their identity almost completely anchored into the idea of being a good student or a good researcher or a good faculty member or whatever it might be, that person is incredibly vulnerable to large shifts in their mood that ultimately will affect their ability to be productive. And again, not just productive in the sense of getting your writing done, but just being a happy, well-balanced person in the world. And that's because they have such little connection to things outside of their identity of being a smart person or of being an expert or whatever it might be, that whenever you get feedback, whether that's from a reviewer or a faculty member or the chair of your thesis or dissertation, whenever you get that feedback and it's not positive, then you immediately feel incredibly isolated and lonely and angry and frustrated because you're cut off from everything, and the one thing that you've invested all of yourself into, being a smart person, being a good student, being an expert, now that's being challenged, and that can cause an identity crisis. So what I'd like to do then is talk about three things that I think that we can do to be more intentional about breaking out of our habits of loneliness. Because I really want to make sure that we are working toward a place where we are psychologically and emotionally fulfilled, and we can be productive in our writing and also just be happier and healthier adults in the world. So the first thing I would say is that it's really important that you're intentional about building community with other people. If you're in a new place, whether that's a new grad program or a new job, whatever it might be, you need to start developing relationships with your colleagues or your cohort and the people who are in your community, whether that's on the campus or beyond it. In fact, what I would say is that you need to create community in two different ways. One, you need to have a social community. You need to have a community of people that have interests that lie beyond your job or beyond your graduate program. You need to have people in your life that you can have conversations with about things that have nothing to do with your research or your job or anything else. So for me, for example, I really love playing pickleball. That's my outlet. It helps me get physically active, but also there's a group of people called the Cedar Valley Pickleball Club. It's like hundreds of people. They're all ages, all sorts of jobs, all sorts of backgrounds. And it's really nice just to get out there, be a little physically active, sweat a little bit, and talk to people who don't talk or think like academics. I mean, I love talking about the stuff that I'm passionate about. I love talking about my research. I love talking about things connected to academia or about teaching, about all those things. But you can't do that 24/7. Like, that's not healthy for a person to do that, to be obsessed with something in that way. Being able to go out and talk to other people, about their kids, about their jobs, about was that ball in or out? Oh, that person's always calling things out whenever they shouldn't. And we all kind of roll our eyes every time they call something out. Just having that level of just human connection is good. I would encourage you to have a similar sort of approach to developing a social group. So whether it's pickleball or going to the gym, knitting club, swimming, whatever it is, you need to have something that other people expect you to show up to, that they will be concerned if you don't, that has regular meeting times, and that helps provide an alternative space for you to get your batteries recharged and to get out of the idea of 24/7 always having to be an academic. So you should have that kind of social community. You should also, though, have a work-based community. So this might be a writing group of people, a small collective of folks where you share work with each other, or maybe it's even just one person out of your department, like an accountability buddy. Just someone that you meet once a week or every month or whatever it might be, that you share your work or you share what's going on, but it's something that's structured and scheduled. So that way, whenever you get in a place of being lonely, you don't get to a place where you're just like, oh, yeah, I should reach out to that person, but I just don't feel like I can. I just don't have the energy to do that. Or, oh, I'd like to do that, but, maybe they're busy, so I don't want to bother them. No, you've got it scheduled. You've got something that's already in the books that you're going to meet with this person. So it really helps you get into that more task-centered sort of mindset. Again, this should not be the only way that you have social engagement with people, because then you're not really engaging with people as people. You're engaging with people as sort of tools or extensions of your job. And that's dehumanizing, and ultimately that's not going to serve you, and it's not going to address your loneliness. But if you are taking the time to develop your social communities, then developing these work communities is also a good way for you to make sure that you're in this structured space that helps you be accountable to other people and keeps you in a relationship with people and keeps you out of your own head. I will say, just real quick, as someone who went through a master's and PhD program where drinking was quite prolific, drinking is not a substitute for a robust social community. I think that a lot of academics, whether you're a student or professor, I think we've kind of been socialized in this idea of drinking as this absolutely natural or even essential component of the torture genius persona that we put on. And so you get together with your friends and you have one beer or one drink too many, and all you do is just sit there and myopically talk about your projects and your job and all the things that are going on in grad school or in your department or whatever it might be. That's not decompression, right? That's not helping you mentally. Alcohol is a depressant. So whenever your main way of talking about your job is by imbibing a depressant and then reliving loneliness and trauma as you talk about with other people, that's not going to serve you mentally, right? You should not do that as your social outlet. The second thing that I will say, and I've kind of mentioned this already with the social stuff, but I think it's just important to reiterate, is that it is vital for you to start having a more structured approach to being social. I think that for a lot of us growing up, we just kind of hang out with whoever's around us. We kind of fall in with the people that we like. We fall out with the people that we don't like. It's just sort of a natural process that's happened to us ever since we were children in our schools. But for most of us, whenever we went through our K through 12 schools, we might have had several hundred or even several thousand people. But as you go through your grad programs, and especially whenever you get into your jobs, the amount of people that you interact with is just going to start to contract, right? So in your high school, maybe you had a whole bunch of people. Undergrad, maybe the same amount or maybe a little less or more. But now all of a sudden, starting in your master's program, you have a very narrow group of people. and then doctoral is even more narrow than that, and then being a professor even more narrow than that. So if you just expect sociability to just naturally arise around you, you're going to find that you're lonely a lot of the time, because the people who are around you, they've got their own stuff going on, they've got their own tasks that they need to complete, and if they're not thinking about being intentional and structured about their sociability, and you're not thinking about being intentional and structured about your sociability, then you're just two ships passing in the night and you never connect. So I think making sure that you have regular appointments with your thesis or dissertation chair or with a trusted colleague that you might have kind of helps with that more task-oriented sociability. You can join a rec league or a cycling group or a runners group or something like that. Just something that is scheduled and structured, and that when you're not there, people will notice and reach out and demonstrate that they care about your presence by reaching out to you and asking where have you been, right? That they'll check up on you. And the more structured that your approach is, and the more dependable that you are in that structure, the more of a disruption it is whenever you don't show up to those things, which in turn, it makes it more likely that people are going to reach out to you and make sure that you course correct if you start getting into a spiral of loneliness. The last thing that I'll say, and this might even sound a little counterintuitive at this point, but you do need on some level to embrace being alone as a part of academia. And that's not the same as embracing loneliness, though. Loneliness to me is whenever we're cut off from other people. It's not just about being alone. It's about desiring connection with other people, but not being able to make that connection or not being able to maintain that connection. And that ultimately serves to diminish your psychological or your emotional well-being. Loneliness is something that saps us of our ability to be full and be happy and to work towards the things that we really want to do. Being alone is not necessarily a problem. There might be times whenever you do need to be alone, that you need that space to think through something, or that you aren't really recharged by being around other people if you're more introverted. But even being introverted doesn't mean that you have no connections with people. That's the difference to me between being alone or being introverted, if that's your personality type, and being lonely, which is ultimately destructive. So how then can we be alone without being lonely? I think that it's important for us to sort of reframe being alone as solitude. I think there's a long history of the idea of solitude, meditation, deep thinking, that all those things have a much more positive connotation for us about getting our work done or thinking through problems than loneliness does. I think that solitude is something that, even though that's something that we do alone, solitude is not us consigning ourselves to loneliness. It's not us torturing ourselves in order to get accomplishment. It's not us feeling bad in order to feel good about the things that we have in our lives. It is about finding moments of peace with ourselves and being happy with ourselves, but ultimately going back to a place that respects our own innate sociability and our own desire to be around other people, whether that's a lot of people or a few people or a lot of contact or a little bit of contact, but having those connections and being able to be sustained through those relationships. I think that if you try to reframe this idea of being alone into solitude, there's a couple of things that you can do to kind of help you wrap your head around this mental space. First, I think it's important that you're only spending a certain amount of time in solitude in order to get your writing done or your reading done or your grading done or whatever it is, right? But you don't cut yourself off from other people for long, extended periods of time. Like if you're saying to yourself, I need solitude, and so I haven't had a real conversation with a person in 3 weeks, that's not solitude, that's loneliness, right? That's a problem. If you're saying on Fridays between the times of noon and 6, that's my writing time, and I need everyone to not be around me while I focus on this time of solitude, that is healthy and normal. So look at your calendar, your planner, whatever it is, set times that you're going to have for writing or reading or whatever, stick to those times. Jealously guard them, because there are so many things that will try to take that time away from you. And if you say, oh, I can't do this or I can't be there for that because that's my writing time, that's my writing day. People are going to pressure you. They're going to give you a raised eyebrow. They're going to, okay, like you can't write any other time. No, you can't. That's your time of solitude. That's your time of contemplation. That's your time of productivity, right? So making sure that you are guarding that time. And then whenever you're there, set yourself a specific amount of time for you to be productive. You're not going to be productive if you think to yourself, oh, I'm going to go to my office today. I don't have anything else to do, so I'm going to spend 6, 8, 10 hours writing and reading stuff. I'm just going to get so much done. Like, that's not going to work out for you, because you're going to find that as your cup doesn't get refilled because you've cut yourself off from other people, that your mental energy is going to start to atrophy. It's going to become harder for you to make or maintain those connections. And then you're going to start being lonely, and then that's going to lead to other negative psychological and emotional outcomes. So as we wrap up, I just want to reiterate, if you are feeling intense feelings of loneliness, and you think that those things are also connected to feelings of depression, anxiety, other sorts of negative psychological or emotional issues, I encourage you to reach out to people, reach out to a therapist, reach out to professionals, so that way you can get the support that you need in order for you to be happy and healthy. There is no amount of productivity, there is no amount of getting things done, there's no amount of publications, awards, anything that is worth you being a miserable human being. There's so much going on this planet, good, bad, and indifferent. The last thing that we need to do is find new ways of torturing ourselves in order for us to feel like we deserve some moment of respite or happiness in the time that we have on this planet. We've talked about in one of the previous episodes about rediscovering the joy of writing. I think writing can and should be a joyous space. It's one of the few places where we get to generate new knowledge, assuage our curiosity, and really just push the envelope of the things that we know or can know, and all of that. It's exciting and it's new, and it's something that should be inspiring and that sparks joy for you. And if that's not the way that you feel, then there's something else going on. And that means that we need to take a step back, recalibrate, and start to think about what it is that's keeping us from feeling our full and authentic selves and making the connections that are going to sustain us, not just in our productivity of our writing, but also just in life in general. All right, so that's going to be it for me, folks. As always, I appreciate you listening. I'm always interested in the things that you all do to find a place of solitude, to find a place of joy in your writing. So if you have any tips, tricks, habits, or rituals, anything that you use to negotiate loneliness or to find a place of solitude or to find a place of joy in your writing, then let me know. I want to be able to pass that advice on to my own clients and my own students. And I'm also happy to give you a shout out about whatever it is that you contribute to me the next time that I address something like this on an episode. I'm also still open for clients right now. So if you want someone to talk to about your research, about the ideas that you're having, feedback that you're getting from an editor or grant reviewer, whoever it might be, reach out to me. I'm happy to set up a time that we can discuss consultations, maybe even an ongoing relationship where I can help you with your writing and the projects that you're doing. Because I would love to be able to work with you and make sure that the work that you are doing is getting into the hands of the people who are going to read it and enjoy it. So thank you all again, and I'll see you in the next episode. Hey writers, what's stopping your best ideas from becoming your next big publication? Brilliant ideas shouldn't die in your drafts folder. Now's the time to bridge the gap between the possible and the published. If you have the time, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe to the podcast, leave a positive review, assign this to your classes, or share it with a colleague. All those things help get the word out and let me know what I can do to make this podcast the best resource for you. Also, if you'd like to set up a time to chat with me about your next big idea, then you can find my information in the podcast description where you can schedule a time. So until then, keep healthy, keep writing, and don't let reviewer 2 get you down.